Welcome to D&D Author Showcase. I'm Chad Robert Morgan, and today's episode is brought to you by the letter V. Whether it's vampires or vans with tinted windows, if it starts with the letter V, just run.
Yeah, just run.
Just
Danger.
run. So this week we're pleased to have Raven Belasco, author of Blood Ex Libris.
Yes. And a few other things.
Well, we'll go ahead and start with that. Tell us some of the other things, and where can people find you? Where can they find your books?
So the easiest place to find me is my website, ravenbelasco. A little bit of a pun in URL form. And that has everything you could want to purchase from me. You can either get my books directly from me with signatures, or it has every place on the internet you could want to buy them. But my favorite thing is when people support their local bookstores or libraries and go and request my stuff from there. So as for the other things I did, Blood Ex Libris is the first book in the series. Blood Demands is the second book in the series. And somehow I don't have the third book here, but that is Blood Eternal. And then book 3.5 is Blood Triad. And I'm writing book 4 right now.
Very cool. Any upcoming events?
Yes. Actually, I'm going to be at the Hellmouth Convention next month in Torrance, California.
Oh, that's here.
Yeah.
Nice. I actually, I have a friend that's going there, Casey Cordell. You should definitely say hi to her. Great person. I haven't signed up for that event because I wasn't quite sure it was the right vibe for me. But I now have 2 reasons to go check it out.
It is the best convention. I didn't get to go last year, but I got reports back. People are just great. Like it is a really solid, sweet fan base, and everyone's there because they're passionately nerdy, which is my people. And it's set in the high school where they shot Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So you're just kind of living, in the fantasy. And I think it's one of the best conventions that one can do in a year because it's smaller. All proceeds go to, there's 3 charities that they're supporting. And people are there because they just want to be, like they're not like showing, I mean, they may be cosplaying, but they're not there like in I'm showing off my really fancy cosplay. It's just people wanting to have a fun weekend together. And I just and just nerd out on, vampires and Buffy and other topics like that. And it's about the people, really, and a great location.
That was one thing that made me a little reluctant to sign up, is because I thought it was more of a Buffy centric or vampire centric convention, and my horror is a little bit more like not quite in any one category kind of thing.
Right. But I mean, on Buffy, they have demons, they have werewolves, they have, like Hush, the episode Hush.
Oh, I love that one. Yeah.
I mean, that's solid horror right there, So I think with, people that are coming to Vend, they're very welcoming and supportive. If you have anything that ties to Buffy at all, then they're just gonna, eat it up.
I will say that, just real quick, what day was that convention again?
The 13th to the 15th.
13th to the 15th of May?
June.
Okay. Because it would be really nice to meet you in person, because this is actually a little unusual for me, because usually the authors I have on, I meet them at the conventions, I get their book, I read it, I review it, and then we bring them on. I actually met not you, but your publisher.
Yes.
At Vanille's Vampire Weekend.
She's a great stand-in for me, though.
Well, I think you really owe her like a bottle of scotch for surviving that convention. I'm going to tell you that.
Oh, I know. I know how much I owe her for that. I am in her debt eternally. Like we're gonna have to go into vampire lifespans for me to pay her back for that.
This is another reason why my wife will no longer let me to sign on conventions unless we check them out first. Because
Right.
we had a mutual friend, Scott Harper, who is also a vampire aficionado, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm doing this Knicks event. It's the first time they're doing it, and we're setting up. He's setting up. They haven't even opened the doors. He just walks over, and goes, 'I'm sorry.'"
Maybe next year there'll be less chaos. It seems like it's a convention with real potential. So running. I don't want to run a convention personally. So, like I have empathy for people that are trying to herd that many cats.
There is a trick to marketing I know I have not figured out yet. Speaking of which, well, you do have a publisher. You have a small press publisher.
Yep.
Before that, were you doing any of your own marketing? Are you doing any of your own marketing now?
Oh, I'm very active in my own marketing. I have Instagram and YouTube accounts that I regularly update. That's you. You can be the most well-known author in the world now and still have to be doing your social media. Like you don't get to opt out as an author anymore for that kind of stuff. Um, uh, which makes me wish I'd been born like 100 years ago or something, because or 50 years ago even, because I hate all of this. Like I just want to like sit in my nice little basement here and just write books and be completely solitary. But I don't get to do that. But not that I don't actually love it when I get out and meet people, doing the conventions and stuff. I whinge and moan on the way there, but once I'm there, I love every second of it. And when I run into people who are excited about the books, that brings me so much joy. So there's always a note in my acknowledgments in my books thanking my readers because I love them. And just meeting people that are into the same geekish topics and being able to just chat about that, it's actually good for me. So I can't complain too much, but having to do all that is not fun. I was published by another publishing house before Immoral Influence Publications, and they were a disaster. They did not understand my work. They didn't promote my work, and they really did not support me in any way. And it was very bad experience. Happily, I was able to get the rights reverted, my intellectual rights reverted, and find a better publishing house. So,
And I take it that's who you're with now. That's who I met at.
yes,
Yes.
yep, yep. Little logo on the edge of the books there. That's the right people to be with.
Uh, Funny story. We do have kind of an acquaintance in common. The only other person who I've interviewed who I didn't meet ahead of time. And when I was reading your book, I'm like, I know who would love this book, because she also writes about vampires and has a lot of sex in her books. So I sent a message to Dicey Grenner, and she's
Oh, I
like, "Oh,
love
we've
them
had her
too.
twice already." I was like, I was actually a little upset. I wanted to be the surprise, you know. But of course, Dicey is like 2 steps ahead of me in all things, because she's
I had been a fan of hers, so I actually begged to be on the show the first time. They just sort of let me on out of the kindness of their hearts, and then they realized I was cool, and I've come back again, and I look forward to every time I can hang out with those two. But it's yeah. When you find like the good people in this in the writing community, you don't let them go. And Dicey and Chantel are good people with a great podcast.
that brings up an interesting topic, something that we've talked a little bit about. So previously, I was doing the podcast with my son, who is 17, and whenever we hit a book that has a lot of sexual content, he starts getting a little queasy. He like skips those sections.
I wouldn't want to talk about that with my parent either.
Yeah. I don't think he wants to talk about it at all. Right.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, uh, and I don't think it's just him because it's like I've talked with his girlfriend. I like in my latest book, Fear. His girlfriend read it, and she was giving me her notes.
Yeah.
And there was a story arc which was about some ancestral twins that she was just like, I don't know why I was there. You could have completely cut that out and everything like that. Um,
His flowers in the attic is lost on this generation, huh?
so I mentioned that once on the podcast. I was kind of talking with my son. I was like, if you are indicative of your generation, does that mean writers with a lot of erotica in it are going to have a trouble finding an audience 10, 20, 30 years down the line? And keep in mind, I'm working off of a sample size of like one, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like this is not.
What did he say?
Um, I think he was like, I'm not really interested in this topic. Let's move on.
Right.
Because he's 17, he doesn't want to talk to me about anything.
Yes.
Um, which is normal. But I know, like Dicey got her feathers a little ruffles, going, it's just him and his son, that kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's fair. But that brings the question: um, are as somebody, because in the beginning of your book, there was a lot of sexual events happening in the beginning of your book. By the second half, that pretty much went
We
away.
moved on to different types of action.
Yeah. But as somebody who is not shying away from the more adult material, are you finding that difficult to find an audience, or is the audience eating that up? Or are you finding that your audience is skewing older because of that? Or
That is a really excellent question, actually, and one that I have been dealing with from the first time publishing the book. Uh, let's see, trying to break it into discrete answers. So your son and his girlfriend aren't like just how that generation is going to be. There are people in that generation who are going for the raunchiest, novels they can find, and that is not going away. It's very well alive. Romantasy is being read, by the teens and 20s, and that's not anything I'm worried about. And my readership ranges from people who are just old enough to buy the book to people in their 60s or older. So I have a wonderful spread of readers, and I'm really lucky about that. But there is a real division between people who are going to be grumpy if sex isn't in the book, especially if it's a vampire novel, or people who are like, I do not want any open door, anything, just the minute that things start going in that direction, slam the door shut and go to the next chapter. And so when I'm doing marketing, which, is going back to the marketing thing, I'll be seeing posts on Facebook groups or the like, where people say, I want books with, this kind of characters, and these kinds of qualities and these kinds of tropes. And they either say, and I want the open door, spiciest sex scenes you can give me, or they say, no sex, not even romance. Don't give me any books with that. And so it's really divided. And I think there are a lot less readers now who are kind of like, oh, there could be sex. There doesn't, for me growing up, I never knew when there was going to be sex scenes in a book. It was, you'd be going and reading and all of a sudden be like, oh, okay, this is happening, and there was no marketing about it. Like, one of the examples I always like to give is the Clan of the Cave Bear series. The first book, there was one horrific rape scene, which they didn't prepare any you for at all. No trigger warnings back then. But then the rest of the books in the series had really explicit sex scenes about every 72 pages. I counted. And I mean, it was like, it was just like romping through the Paleolithic and then just stop for some caveman sex and then go back to inventing the wheel and soap. And, it was very silly. And I ended up, I don't know why I read the whole series, but I did. But, you know, in no way was that ever mentioned, on the back cover or, in any conversations with anyone, except now I talk about it and people go, oh, right. Yeah. There was a lot of sex in those books. But how we look at sex scenes in books is changing. And using sex as marketing is a thing, but also using no sex as marketing is also a thing. So I guess it helps you find the people who want to read your stuff. But, for me, I didn't really feel like I had an option because I've been studying the vampiric, I mean, casually since I was about 12, which is when I read Dracula. And then I just sort of never lost interest in it. And vampires are the monsters of sex. They can stand in for the threat of sex as like an STD, or other, disease. They are the sexy monster, like you don't really, unless you have very interesting tastes, want to have sex with a zombie, but a vampire is suave. They're in the evening, wear, they're coming and seducing you. And even if you're not writing an open door spicy sex scene, when a vampire bites your neck, they're penetrating you, right? It's all sex. So I just was like, okay, we're doing sex. We're doing sex. Like I wasn't going to shy away from that. And so I built it in that my Ammer, which is their word for themselves in their language, can't really separate the act of getting nutrition from the act of sex. And I mean, if it's an absolute emergency and they need to do it for healing and and they're in danger, they can, but they don't want to. Like those things are inextricable for them. So that's why there are so many sex scenes, especially at that point in book one, because to do the blood exchange, your average Ammer is not going to think sex is optional. They're not going to want to do a blood exchange with someone they can't be having sex with.
I always thought, because I mean, I agree with you saying that vampires are the sexual monsters. I remember as a kid, my family used to love Love at First Bite and would watch that one like 20 times.
Oh my God, yeah. Haven't heard of that one in a minute. That was good.
Remember, you want to come in for a quickie? It's never a quickie, always a longie, But I think the sexual aspect comes from they came to prominence in the Victorian era, which was a very prudish
larger society. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was a representation of all the society's repressed feelings.
Yes, exactly. When you're in a society where you can't have legs of tables and chairs be exposed, and you have a monster that is grabbing you and biting your neck and sticking their fangs into you, it's the perfect vehicle to discuss sex when you're not allowed to talk about sex.
Which kind of makes me wonder what the books are going to be, because I kind of feel like we're not repressed. We're sort of the opposite. Like, I kind of suspect that one of the reasons why my son's generation is way less interested in sex isn't because it's repressed, but because it's so ubiquitous. He can just bring it up on his phone, while he, between school periods. It's everywhere to the point where he's desensitized.
Thank you, internet. Yeah, but kids have to rebel, in my teen years, I was getting piercings everywhere. And nowadays, a lot of teenagers are piercing free. And that's how they say, I'm not my parents' generation. So things just go in cycles. But, people still have sex drives. That one's not going away anytime soon. They're just being more private about it. And they can be as finicky as they like. For me, you know, before the internet, like getting your hands on porn was like a quest, like, it was work. And when you don't have to put in any of that work, you can now be really finicky, and that's great, because I've seen some really bad porn, in the desperation of any porn, right? And so, if they can just do exactly what suits them, to the exact quality that they demand, I think that's a win. So if they're going to be super finicky about it, like, go them. Like, I'm glad they have that opportunity. I mean, there's so much, because it's out there. They don't have to be sort of desperately hunting it down. So I think that's good, personally.
I do remember the days of waiting till your dad was at work and sneaking, because you knew he had like that one Playboy under his mattress, and you treated it like, it was some rare book from the Vatican. You're turning the pages with a pair of tweezers, because you couldn't mark any of the pages. And if you saw like an old one that someone had thrown away,
Yep.
and like there's only like 7 pages, and the pages were all yellow, but you're like, yeah, we found the lost Ark of the Covenant.
Yep. No, I somehow discovered my grandfather had porn tapes hidden in his bedroom. So when he was on trips, I watched some pretty horrifically bad stuff, and in fascination, like, wow, I'm watching this, and then going, oh, what are they doing there? That doesn't look good, So it's I think it's I think in that way it's a better world, just getting the chance to actually, like, be able to be like, oh, I'm not gonna look at that crap. I know what I want. I know, like, I can get better versions of this, or I can just run the movie in my head, and not have to watch any of that, because there's no scarcity, so. Which was not the topic I thought we were going to talk about. I have a lot of opinions. So.
Well, let's steer that back to the. So I was actually going to try to steer this back to the vampires, because you're like the third author I've interviewed that is like focusing on vampires. Mm-hmm. And I think you said part of the reason why already is that they're the sexy monster, right?
I mean, that's not why I'm focusing on them. I didn't actually intend to be writing vampires, as much as I researched, like as fascinated as I was by them in my preteens, and studied them. Like, I did my senior paper on the vampiric muses of certain poets in college. It's wonderful what they let you get away with in comparative literature, but. That was not my intention, and I thought that was a little almost too on brand for me. And I had intended my first novel to be science fiction. I had no intention of writing a vampire novel, but then I had this insane dream, actually one of the sex scenes from the books. And when I woke up, I knew the characters' names, I knew parts of their backstory. It was very well fleshed out, if you'll excuse the pun. And I just went, oh shit, this is a novel. This is more than a novel. This is a bunch of novels. And you can't say no when the muse, like, shows up and says, here you go. Wait, no, I don't want to write that. Like, the muse will never come back. You don't get to say, like, fuck off to the muse. So I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm writing a vampire series then. And so I sort of had to be dragged kicking and screaming into this. Now I'm really happy. I was actually thinking about that yesterday as I walked the dog, that I had no intention, but I am where I should be. So it was not a choice, but I do have new things to say, new things to consider about the vampiric, and about how that type of monster is a dark glass for humanity, a dark mirror in which to view ourselves. And somebody's got to stand up and be like, vampires are not just sparkly and sexy. Like, vampires are scary.
Vampires
And
don't sparkle.
no, they don't.
I'm
No
going to die on
sparkle.
that hill.
No
Vampires do
sparkles
not
allowed.
sparkle.
We are a sparkle free zone. But someone has to stand up and say vampires are not just about sex, because there are so many books now where vampires are just sexual and the monstrous has been removed. And I'm here to fight that actively. I'm keeping the monster in my sexual monsters. Like, there is sex, but they are monsters, and I don't want anyone to forget that, and I don't want anyone to ignore what that means. If we as humans created the myth of vampires, then what are we talking about ourselves? What are we trying to investigate here? And that's underneath all of the novels that I write, or at least in this series.
See, now, as much as I like this book, now I kind of want to find out what that sci-fi book was going to be like. Now you got me curious on that.
It's coming. It just might not be here for another 5 years, or I don't know. There's probably going to be 9 novels in this series, so I gotta crank them out. The fans demand it, though, so the faster I can write it, the happier they are. But yeah, once I get through these, then I can go back to the original plan.
I don't have an army of fans clamoring for my next book, so I have the freedom to be a little more choosy about what I write. So I tend to alternate when I do. I'm finishing up my last book, Fear, which is actually in stores now. The hardcover, I'm having issues getting it to publish. The audiobook has been the audiobook from hell.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I found out there's a bug in Audacity, and I found out by recording the entire thing and finding out half of them are messed up. Turns out if I plug the mic in and then turn on Audacity, it's fine. If I have Audacity open and plug in the mic, it doesn't connect correctly, and then there was like a whole band that was muted and didn't pick up. So half the book has got to get re-recorded now.
That is a nightmare. I am so sorry.
So
yeah, that's why my audiobooks are done by the professionals. I'm not messing about with that. Like, I can write books. I can do a bunch of things, but I was like, I am leaving that whole thing to other people who know what they're doing, and I'm not asking for that world of pain. And I'm very glad that I worked with Punch Audio. They took really good care of me. So that was never my problem. I had to get them a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I still had a lot of work to do because, as you know, there's a whole bunch of foreign languages in the book.
I was going to get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Big old funny names on everybody. And of course the Ammer language, which is a fantasy language I created for the series. And so I had to do pronunciation guides, for each chapter. And that meant, at least with the Ammer language, I know how to say that. But for everything that wasn't French, I had to reach out and get native speakers and pay them to record exactly how things are said properly. Like, I had already used them to edit me. So I just had to reach out and be like, hey, can I get you to record these sentences, please? But it was a lot of work, but absolutely worth it.
Yeah, I tend to do my own just because, one, I'm too damn broke to do that. I also find that when I do the audiobook, that's my final edit.
Yes. Oh my God, yes. That's so painfully true. When the books went into the recording studio, we found all these little typos that had gotten through all the stages. So yeah, after every audiobook comes out, or at the same time as every audiobook is released, a like version 2, now free from typos, is released on my books. So you gotta put them out, but there is no reason why you can't put those typo fixes in and re-release it. So
I also find it's not only the typos. I mean, that's a big part of it. But also you can have a sentence that is grammatically correct that just sounds weird because maybe the words being very repetitive. I remember the one time I was reading this line. It's like, why the hell did I write a line with 7 S words right in a row? I mean, it sounds like a tongue twister. You know, why? And I can't be torturing the narrator because it's me, right? I mean, what kind of self deprecating kind of cruelty thing kink am I going into on this one? Um, so I just feel like, and I talked about it in one episode of the podcast. I would recommend personally, even if you weren't doing the audiobook, to do an
Mhm.
audiobook, right? Because
Yeah.
if you have to sit down and don't just read it out loud, actually hit record.
Yeah.
Because if you're reading out loud, when you read mentally, you start skimming,
Yes. Yeah.
especially when you wrote it because you know what it's supposed to say.
Yes.
But when you're doing the audiobook, you can't read what it's supposed to say. You have to read what it actually says word for word. And it does force you to, um, you know, be more anal when you're reading that. And I find, at least for me personally, that is a mandatory step now,
Yeah.
before the thing is final. What what is your editing process like when you're doing a book? I mean, do you have an editor before you hand it to the editor? What passes are you doing? What is your process?
So it's many stages. So when I hit the end the first time, I don't consider that the first draft. I don't even have a word for it. It's still sort of like it exists in the world. I'm happy that I've gotten it onto the page, but I one of the ways I prevent ever having writer's block is that if I get a little like I don't know exactly what's happening in this bit, I just put like little like XXX and then I highlight it and then I go to the scene that I know is happening next that's in my head and I just keep rolling. And I did that the first time. I got to the end and then I went back to give it an edit and I was like, "Oh shit, there's whole sections I haven't written." It was horrifying, but it works. So for me, after that first just get it out, um, I go back and I just go, sentence by sentence, edit what I can. And then I find the areas where I just kind of left things a little unfinished and I finish that. But now those things need to be edited. So I go back and start again from scratch. And that's where I really dig in. And I mean, there have been times, especially in Blood Ex Libris, which it did take 3 years to land with my the horrible publisher the first time, and then it got a whole re-edit before being published by IIP, where I would like take a sentence I didn't like, rework it, chug along, come back again, look at that sentence, basically put it back the way it was before, chug along, then send it to my editor, who is wonderful and does not let me get away with repeating words at all, which I am guilty of. And then I'm looking at that sentence and I'm like, no, I was right the first time I edited it. So some of those areas have been really seriously polished. Like commas have just been moved around that sentence so many times. Um, so yeah, there are a lot of steps before it goes to the editor, and then after it comes back from the editor, I go over it line by line again, input her edits, which sometimes means just I don't like my original sentence now because she's pointed out what's wrong with it. I'm not delighted with what her suggestion is to fix it, so I come up with a third option. So then that happens, and now things do get published at that stage, but I do consider it going into the audiobook recording as a real final editing pass now. Like it really is the finest tuning you can get. Happily, I'm usually pretty happy with the see, look, I repeated. I need my editor right there. The shape of my sentences, how they work, but just all the little misspellings and I lay out the books myself in Atticus, and sometimes spaces and punctuation go a little funky. So that's the moment we catch those. So but yeah, it's a real process for me, and I love it, and I think all those editing passes are really vital, because I really care about getting my characters' words right. Like my characters are very real in my head, and it's very important for me to do right by them.
It's funny you're talking about the process because I've heard of one other author that does something pretty much the same thing, and that's Peter Klein's.
Uh-huh.
So Peter Klein's before COVID used to host the Writers Coffee House up in Burbank, and so I would
Uh-huh.
go. Is there a chapter near where you are for the Writers Coffee House? Because they're all over the country.
I don't think so. I'll have to look.
Um, so before COVID, now, I think he still does the coffee house, but he does it down in San Diego now. But I would go up there, and one day he was talking about that when he was writing his rough draft. He'll do that, like he'll write, and he'll get up to like some action scene, and then he'll go put action scene here, and then he'll
Yeah,
keep on going.
exactly.
Or
Yeah.
or
Oh,
even
there's a whole scene where they're talking, but I don't really have that dialogue right now, so we're gonna go to the action scene. Yeah.
um with your book, you weren't just dealing with vampires; you're dealing with the vampire. You
Yeah.
you
The
were
man.
going you were going to the OG vampire. And we talked about this a little bit, but you had to research like the Turkish language and the Romanian language, um, and to the point where like when I was listening to the audiobook, and but getting back to that, this conversation is turning into a spiral. Getting back to
Good.
that, the audiobook was very well produced, and
Oh,
I
gorgeous.
I think for about 2 weeks after listening to that, I would go up to them like, oh, babanoosh, and everything like that, because I had they've slipped from my mind since then. But for like a week or two, they were ingrained in my head, and I was talking Romanian for some reason. Um,
I know another reader started calling her girlfriend Dragamia.
what? I mean, I'm guessing you kind of mentioned it a little bit because you started by reading Dracula, but what made you go with Dracula as opposed to say creating your own vampire or what made you go with the OG vampire for your story?
That was that damn dream. He was in it, and his name was Sandu, but I knew that it was Vlad Sepesh. And when I woke up, and so that's the first notes that I wrote down. In fact, I just wrote the whole scene down, and then put some notes on after from that. Like I got out of bed, I grabbed a big mug of tea, and I just started typing. So I have regretted that was him, in the early stages of trying to find someone to publish the book, because like who wants to talk about Vlad Dracula again? I think it made it a lot harder to find a publisher, because I'm telling a story that's been told so many times, and they didn't want to give it a chance to see that it was a very different story, while at the same time paying a lot of homage to the real historical aspects. A lot of the stories, about the man, the myth, the big bat. They just they have their own things they do with him, but I think until Coppola's Dracula, they really weren't touching on the real historical Vlad Tepes's story. And then even after that, they took kind of what they wanted, but there was a whole lot of stuff that got left that was gorgeous material to work with, including giving me the bad guy. His beef with Mehmet was right there waiting. I didn't have to come up with a bad guy. He was waiting for me, and waiting to get even with Vlad after all these centuries. So in the end, I'm happy he is who he is. And I do get to invent all the Amor that I want. I never have to work with any historical figures. Oh, that's not true. In book 2, one actually imposed himself into the book. One of the bad guys just wrote himself in, and I had to deal with him. But I can have as many fictional characters as I like, but I've actually come to really love working with real historical characters, they give so much to a story. And the great thing about writing vampires is you can just go look through history and be like, oh, you're a bad lad. You'd be an excellent vampire. I bet you were a vampire. And then a little thinking, and you're right there as to how that happened. And boom, like it just gives so much depth and fun for me as an author to writing the books. So in the beginning, I just wrote it. I didn't think about it. I was just writing it. And then I tried to sell those books and I'm like, why did I use Vlad Dracula? No. And now I'm at a place where I'm really happy that I did.
It was a very deeply researched book. Because I remember, yeah, because I listened to the whole thing, including the author's notes, which was a whole chapter in of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, you put in the work on this, right? You didn't just go like, oh, and Dracula came into town one day. No, you put in a lot of research time into this project. So yeah, there was a lot that went into it. It was not just a casual kind of, you weren't winging it. Let's put it that way.
It started with him just showing up. So in that respect, it was, he casually walked on the scene. But once he was there, I didn't feel I could not do the research. And it paid massive dividends because as I went through his life, I was like, oh my God, this bit's perfect. Oh my God, this bit's perfect. Everything chunked into place from the history. And as I was researching him and going back and researching deeper into the early myths of vampires, the Amur came together as a species. And so all that research was a delight. And the books would not be what they are without that grounding. I wouldn't want to have written those books tried to have written them without that. They need it.
Where did you go for your research? Because I mean, again, a lot went into it. I mean, guess
library and the internet. That was it. I wandered down to the library, hit the vampire section. Shades of me when I was 12, and then I did. I went to the Wikipedia page and I went down to the very last thing where they did the sources, and then I went to the sources of the sources. And just found the best, research material that I could find, the stuff that really got into the meat of his life. And I read some real obscure stuff along the way, but I love doing research. And so that for me was just pleasure. Like that was just as good as doing the writing, was doing the researching.
And I think, if I remember right, you also were thinking a couple of people that helped you with the Romanian and Turkish languages.
Oh yes, no, I'm not touching other cultures without a sensitivity editor. Like that way lies regret. So happily, I have a friend who is Romanian, and I actually worked for a while at a language course company. So I had made contacts with people who spoke languages as I was helping to write the courses, or in some case, writing the courses. And I had written the Romanian course with my friend Ligia. And so I'd stayed in touch with her. And when the book started happening, I reached out and I said, okay, I need to ask you a question. How do Romanians feel about Vlad Țepeș? And she's like, oh, he's a national hero to us. And I was like, that's good. I mean, we had talked about him a little, actually, when we wrote the course, the Romanian course. I had put in some lines like in Romanian, I do not drink wine. In the course as little vampire gotchas, and she thought it was hysterical. And she had sent me like these really cheesy vampire postcards from Romania. So we already had that connection, and that gave me the confidence to work with the Romanian language so heavily. And then I just found someone who was a specialist in both Turkish and Arabic language and culture, and I had some stuff written in there that would have not been good, and she just gave it to me straight, and I was able to rework it, so that I was respectful to that culture, which was really hard because, you know, at first I was like, oh, we've got, Vlad, we've got his ancient enemy Mehmet. It's perfect. And then I was like, oh my God. And right now, and I'm writing this at a time when, in the United States, Arabic people are being treated very badly and Turkish people are sort of lumped in. And I was like, that's not great. like, so I I had to work very carefully to build bad guys that were not racist tropes. And so that was very careful work. And I hope I got away with it. I put all the love and care into it that I could. So any culture that I deal with, and I want to have very diverse vampires, because in a lot of books, the vampires really are quite samey. I want to have a world of vampires, but now I'm playing in the sandbox of cultures that are not mine. So I have learned bring specialists in early and get their input and take it to heart. So
I had a similar issue when I was doing the Baby Eater,
uh-huh.
because it's sort of the Filipino equivalent of a vampire.
Yes.
And I was fortunate that I was actually sleeping next to my cultural. So the goal was actually we were supposed to write it together, and together became I did all the work, twisted her arm, had her read it, and she told me all the parts I got wrong.
Yep.
And I was practicing for the audiobook the Filipino accent, and I didn't. I wanted
That
it to be
been quite a lot of work.
the accent wasn't nearly as bad as the Tagalog.
Yes.
Because I would read a line and she would go, no, it's,
No.
manami, manami, manami. I'll say, okay, manami, manami, manami. No,
No.
manami, manami, manami. And I mean, my ear is not here. And finally she's like, close enough. Nobody's going to care. It's
Yeah.
going to be fine. I would actually record her saying the line
Yep.
and
And then
then
practice it and practice it. Yeah.
practice it and practice it. And
That's what I did to poor Amber. I sent her all these recordings. She's dealing with so many languages in this book. And so she's in the recording studio and she's like, okay, say it, try to record it. Okay. I'm surprised she still likes doing the books, but she seems to love a challenge.
I played one line for her because I wanted to get the accent as authentic as possible, but I didn't want it to come across as patronizing or cliche or anything like that. And she says, "Did I get the I go, did I get the accent right?" And she goes, "I don't get an accent. I'm going. Must be fine then."
Yeah. Is Tagalog a tonal language? I can't remember.
Um, I would say probably yes.
Okay.
I know they do not waste a single letter.
Yes. Yes. No, tonal languages are I cannot hear the different tones. And I worked on the Thai language for the courses I was writing, and I just had to take it for granted. Because I was working with the script part, so I could put the accent marks on there and know that I was using the right word. But if you don't get the rising tone or the lowering tone or the neutral tone, those words mean very different things. Uh,
Well, I do know we kind of went around and around because mananagal is like a 14-letter word, right? And it
yeah.
literally is mananang gal because there's two G's. That first G's got to go on that syllable. This G's got to go on this syllable, and you got to get it right or because they will
Yeah.
come. So a lot of practice on that one.
It's always worth it, though.
Well, that's my most award-winning book, so yeah, that I would say that one paid off. So,
Yeah, exactly.
so Raven, it's been a pleasure. I hope we get
Yes,
to
I'm
do this
so glad we
again.
got to talk. Yes.
So, real quick, let's recap on where people can find you, where are your books, and what's your next event going to be?
Next event is next month, June 13th to 15th at the Hellmouth Convention. Just Google Hellmouth Convention and you'll end up on the Hellmouth. Um, and likewise, Googling me is really, just type in Raven Belasco. You'll get to my website, get to my listing on Amazon, or my Goodreads reviews, or my YouTube or my Instagram. I'm pretty well spread out there, so you'll get to where you need to go. So yeah, it's kind of hard not to find me if you put my name into the old Google search engine.
Well, Raven, it was a pleasure to meet you, and I can't wait to meet you in person next month. I'm going to make it a point to hit that Hellmouth convention.
I can't wait.
And until then, people, keep on reading
And listening.